So there's going to be necessarily a big shake-up when, and it's already happening, when entrenched industries are exposed. There's something that I've heard termed new innovator bullying. And so if somebody brings something that changes the game, then there are those that are going to try to crush that. And you've experienced that yourself in that you're outspoken on a lot of topics and you're bringing a lot of honesty to industry. And there's a driver behind it when there is a certain impetus to basically destroy the new. There's always a driver behind it, and you talk a lot about jealousy. Can you tell us a bit more about how that plays out in business and from your own experience?
Firstly, I'm not truly outspoken, even though that's the terminology that they use for somebody who's prepared to speak against or speak something that is not the norm. I'm simply just expressing the truth as my body knows it to be, and as I know it to be from a collective form of intelligence, as in my body understands other bodies, and essentially at the root of all, we're all the same. So when one body speaks the truth, it actually speaks on behalf of all bodies. So all I do is express what it is that I know to be true to my body, and I say that and speak about that, knowing that it's also true for other people. That's not indoctrination or converting anyone or thinking I'm up myself or being up myself, because that's the way it is. So, we have a situation where the truth is not really discussed. The truth is not really traded. Everybody has a vested interest. And so if you bring out something that is new but steps on the toes of another that is making money out of something that is holding the lesser truth, or perhaps a lie, they are going to use as much might as they can to stop that which is going to change their lifestyle as a result of the way they're able to make money from what they're peddling or what their commodity is producing. I'm all for everybody having the opportunity, within reason of course. Heroin shouldn't be allowed and cocaine should not be allowed to be sold, but for in a truly free economy, we should be able to produce everything and allow people to choose. But that choice should not come from withholding information and lying. It's very simple. It's a totally free and open economy that allows people to truly present what is there, and therefore allowing the consumer to be informed by the truth so that they can make the choices about the product that they are choosing. So I've been producing a form of philosophy and teaching it, and a form of healing, and that hasn't had its freedom because it's been smeared by a small group of detractors and the complicit journalists that have been playing ball with that, and the media barons that allow that. So the public, or the general public, would have a perception of my business, Universal Medicine, and of me that is tainted by the trial by media. They haven't had a true taste as a consumer of what I bring, and it's their right to say, no, I'm not ready for it, no, I don't like it, in fact, I hate it, once they've tried it. But what's happening out there is they're prevented from experiencing the product for themselves and then having the freedom to say yes or no. And this is the part about a free economy that is not so free. So we need to understand that whilst we champion a free economy, it's really not so free, because in many ways it's controlled in no different terms as is communism. In other words, if you don't play ball with the rest of society and produce what we say you can produce, then we'll come down very hard on you. To me, that's a communism off the leash, so to speak. It's not truly a free market. And that's the situation that we have right now. And sadly, that's no different, which means we haven't evolved from the Dark Ages, because now it's just under a different umbrella. Once upon a time, it was the Catholic Church or the imposition of certain religious institutions, and now it's under the term of economy, under the term of media, and under the term of science.
So if you didn't like what someone was doing back in the day, you would just say witch, or just label that person, and you could quash whatever it is that they were bringing. And today what that looks like is, in that era when witch was big, to the layman, perhaps, witch meant something. It meant something to be spooked by. It actually meant there was a danger. Today, what are those triggers? What are those words that have the same effect on people that we actually can't see through? And how does the media capitalise on that kind of blind spot for people?
We're assuming that people are stupid, and they're actually not. And while there are a minority of people that may choose something that is self-harming, it's their prerogative to do so. What we need to understand is, if you're in a village and you're a healer, the village will not allow you to do something that is harming, because the word would get around very quickly. So those who were labelled witch and supposedly doing black magic and supposedly doing harm, it wasn't the villagers that outed them, it was an institutional form of thinking that came and called them a witch and said that you were harming people. In a free economy, that witch would not be able to survive if she or he were truly harming the village. But an authority stepped in and said, hey, you're harming because you're harming, because we say you're harming, but irrespective of the fact that you might be doing a lot of great good and the whole of the village and the community is coming to you, is beside the point. We have decided that you're harming, and that's the way to do it. So the word witch was the smear campaign of the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages, or one of them. In today's modern society, today it's about cult. You know, you're a cult leader. So because we've had a few crazy groups led by some really absurd and disastrous leaders and really deranged and deluded leaders, we have the media being able to capitalize on the word cult and establish itself a place that is having sympathy within society. But it's all a makeup. If it's a truly dangerous group, by all means out it. But don't taint other groups that are different simply because they are different. And so the word today is not witch, today is cult and cult leader. Same thing, we haven't evolved.
And it's interesting what you're saying about the village knows, because the way that you started in business, like the media will give you one version of events of what universal medicine and Serge Benhayon is, but the people on the ground that have grown the business over the 15-year period it's been there tell a different story, and they're the villagers, so to speak. And you never actually relied on media or marketing for your business, so it is a case of an institutionalised, it's almost like blow-ins with the journalists coming and interpreting a certain thing to be something through a certain lens to make their sensationalist story. But the reality is the people on the ground. And we do live in a different age, because we live in an age where we do have the right to publish that is different. And so now we've got the internet. And recently, over 200 plus volunteers actually made their own media about universal medicine, and that is Unimed Living, that's culminated in a massive magazine-style website. So we live in a different age to the Dark Age. Can you talk about the potential of where we are today with that?
The beauty is that we can have our own media. We are our own media, and every single person can be a journalist, so to speak, or its own media baron, simply by starting up a blog or a website. And that's fantastic on one side, because it gives us an opportunity to counter the might and the force that the media has, or what we call the newspapers have, over the small person. And so that's a fantastic leap towards in the right direction. But we need to understand that for journalists to do what they did in the case of Universal Medicine and me, they simply lied. And that's not somebody's trying to defend themselves. That's the truth. They simply lied. And it's utter irresponsibility and no different to the lying that went on in the Dark Ages. And they are to go down in history as being liars because they cannot substantiate beyond the print that they were allowed to do, mind you, by personally being protected by the legal might of the papers that they work for. Because if they did that personally, they wouldn't be able to lie to that degree. And if they have assets, I would have gone after them if they were doing it personally. Because it's very simple. But no, they're protected, so they can get away with the lies. But that's beside the point. What we need to understand is that we have the right today to create the economy that we truly want. My business began through word of mouth. And the village decided that what I was doing was good in one way or another. And eventually some maybe would have decided that what I was doing was not good. And that's a free market. I wasn't harming anyone, but surely I'm not going to be popular with everybody in the way that our philosophy of healing is asking everyone to be the level of responsibility. So that's okay. You can say no to the product, in this case being me. And others were saying yes to the product. And so it grew what we would call organically and was allowed in this free market to grow. But when the media come in and start to tell lies about what I am, what I do, what I teach, and what the students have achieved out of their own free choice, then that's not free market anymore. That's communism. It's no different to communism because we're having Big Brother telling the rest of the public what they want the rest of the public to understand. That is definitely not a free market. And parading itself as a free market is not what we are trying to, we are really living in here. In other words, the moment you step out from the free market you are supposed to have, you are exposing the fact that we don't really have a free market. You have a free market so long as you conform. The moment you don't conform, you discover that it's no different to communism without a leash.
The illusion of freedom.
Correct.
And what are some of those things that, well, one of the things that I've seen that upsets the status quo and how it needs to be, and what I saw at the very genesis of the initial detractors that came about, was a sense of equality with women. The way that you approached your relationships with women were on equal footing, and that in itself destabilizes the status quo in the village even, because that's going to disrupt the man next door who doesn't have an equal relationship with his wife. So at the very beginning, that becomes something that is disrupting the status quo on a very personal level, but then plays out in a bigger realm as well. So there is almost invisible lines that we are not to cross, and one of them is that. And there is not many men that I know of on the public stage, on the world stage, that are as championing of the true equal rights as women, with women as you are. Did that have a part to play?
That had a huge part to play. Our society is still misogynist. And those that are running the media are still misogynist. Religion, institutionalized religion, is still into misogyny. We need to understand that for the 16 years that I've been around, since 1999, and today being 2015, as this interview will probably extend itself beyond these years. So for the first 16 years of my life in this type of service, I've established a quality and level of expression with regard to equality towards women that has not existed before on such a public scale. And the way that I have lived and expressed that has been beyond words, because I've been able to embody it and share that embodiment so that everybody could truly feel the fact that I hold everybody equal. I'm not denigrating towards men, and I'm not denigrating towards anybody, but we are generally holding a woman and her body as the innate beauty and preciousness and sacredness that it rightly belongs in our planet, and is the offering that we need to bring balance to humanity. And that needs to be understood as well.
What do you say to the men and women that will call you a man hater? Where does that come from?
Anybody can hurl abuse. It's cheap. You know, I've made truth something different, in the sense that anybody who has truly spent time with me will know that I live everything that I teach. When I present on stage, it is no different to how I live. I mean, yeah, I'll be presenting things that I not necessarily will discuss at a dinner table, but the fact is that I live everything that I present. And that's important because it's a truth that has a livingness. So for me to be able to, say, lie about another person, that's cheap. It doesn't have to be lived. It can be said in 1 or 2 minutes or in a few seconds. You can cheaply denigrate someone. It doesn't have to be lived. It can just be simple. But so too can sometimes the truth can be cheaply used too, in the sense that it can be touted and espoused but not lived. But I've set a different standard in the sense that I'm not the only one. I know other people have, and I don't have tickets on myself, but I've set a standard where the truth is lived. And for someone to just call me a man hater is cheap. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a man hater. I've brought a level of intimacy and sharing with men that hasn't been able to be expressed so freely in society like we are doing, and I'm doing with hundreds of men. So I can't be a man hater. I'm definitely not a man hater. I'm definitely not misogynist. I'm presenting a level of collectiveness and cohesiveness that we can arise to and easily have in societies everywhere. Why? Because we've been living it for 16 years and have created a community out of it. That community is not in a commune, and it's definitely not a cult, as the cheapsters have been touting. It is a community that is worldly, and if we can live it, anybody can. And if they truly study us, they will see that the rest of the world can adopt, maybe not all, but certainly the great principles that we have been able to share with one another.
It is a very worldly community, with people all throughout the world, in all areas of business, very much in the world, with the universal principles that they're bringing to that. And the beauty of it is that the principles that they're living, they're not a dogma or a set of beliefs or something that has to be taken into one's life, insofar as what I've noticed is that because they're universal in their truths, it's actually the deepest level of common sense we have as people between each other, that we would relate in this way, that we would relate with deepest decency, with care and respect. It's actually what we're all looking for. So is that the way in which you see this growing? In that it may not be, you may get somebody that's never heard of universal medicine, but they are knowing of what is a universal medicine, and that is the care and love that we can be with each other.
Yeah, we need to understand that the community that you're speaking of is held together by the principles through which they live, not aspire to or believe in. And it's a model that has not been achieved before on this level, though there has been many communities throughout time that have achieved that. But we need to understand that it's not new, it's just been replicated or resurrected to be in what we call a modern age. So we've got a group of people worldwide that are collectively known to each other through the way in which they've chosen to live, not through the way in which they have adopted belief systems. And that's important and very distinct and distinguishable in terms of other communities, and that's important to understand. But what are the principles? What is exactly being lived? Well, there's a level of respect. There's a level of decency. There's a level of understanding to not harm each other to the best of our ability. There is definitely not perfection being sought, and imperfection is welcomed, but not irresponsible imperfection in the sense that I'm imperfect, therefore I'm able to do whatever I like. There is imperfection, however, there is responsibility. But within this beautiful community is the equality of men and women, sharing with each other their preciousness. So instead of sharing with each other the character that society says you have to be, and therefore learning to live with each other through tolerance, we have men and women learning to live with each other through the qualities of preciousness and sacredness and tenderness and love and nurturing. And therefore it's establishing a completely different form of relationship between men and women, men and men, and women that needs to be studied openly and without bias and understood for how it truly is. Because essentially we're living an amazing way of being in a world that is showing completely the opposite and heading that way. And a lot of us will say that we are living against the trend. A lot of us have come from abuse and medical conditions that we've been able to arise above. And it's a community that deserves mention. It's a community and way of living that deserves study. But it's also a way of community and living that deserves to be left alone and not smeared simply because it is showing everybody a highly responsible way of being. It's not in your face, it's not out there to convert, it is just simply living and inspiring others or bringing trust back into humanity that shows that this way of being can be lived in the current world.
And you mentioned something about men and women knowing each other by their tenderness and by their sacredness. But in a world in which we have modelled what man means and what woman means to be a certain thing, is there then, so if we believe men to be certain stereotypes, or that there is, a toughness, a hardness, a certain way of being that a man has to be, for you to call a man tender at essence, it can almost be heard as softness, or it can be heard as a weakening of what the man is to be in the world. And do you see this come up for men that are discovering that there can be a much more tender way of being?
You will, through the series of these interviews, ask me lots of questions, no doubt, Rebecca. Some that you will be asking, or mostly asking, on behalf of humanity, on behalf of the community, on behalf of your family and friends, and some may be personal. And what you will always get is an answer that comes from somebody who understands life from their body, a whole body mindedness form of intelligence. So when you ask me about, does the word tenderness, and how does that conflict, how does that oppose, how does that contrast with the way in which a man has been told he has to be, and therefore that tenderness is a sign of weakness, I can answer that from the point of view of understanding intelligence in the body, and that tenderness is a form of intelligence. Tenderness is a form of understanding. Tenderness is a form of awareness. Tenderness is a form of communication that when it's not used, it leaves us lacking. It makes us less. Fragility is another word that is seen as a form of weakness, but fragility is an enormous openness to honesty, and it's a very, very powerful way of communicating with each other. Our fragile moments, our fragilities, our not so developed parts of us that we wish to share with another person, so that they're not held in the fear of them being crushed, but can come out in the open so that another can help you foster them into a much greater ability or aptitude that you can later use as a person. And so we need to understand that we have models out there of what a man is supposed to be and what a woman is supposed to be. That's fine. In a truly free market, We should be able to say, we choose this way and you choose that way. We are both free, and therefore we will leave each other alone, and in the end, the truth will be in the living quality of the people. So if we are living a certain way in this universal medicine community that we call ourselves by, loosely, because we know that's not true, then if we are studied and we see that the quality of our life has definitely improved, there's no need to argue against it simply because it's exposing something in your way of living. You have every free right to live the way you live, and we should be given every free right to live the way we live without the smear campaign that's going on. But the bottom line is, our truth comes from our body, not from our brains.
What would you say to men that feel the truth of what you're saying, that feel the truth of the power of fragility and the power of tenderness, but see a world in which they have to get by in a certain way, or experiencing that non-free market force of being crushed by another? What do you say to those men about how they can make their way in a world that is not supportive of that fragility coming to the fore?
Look, it's unfortunate that for some the only way is aggression and to hide their tenderness, and if that's been their life experience, that needs to be understood. There's no critique from me, or nobody deserves to critique that at all. We need to understand that that's their experience, and that's what they've come to in their own life. But we need to understand that every man is capable of tenderness. And every man does show that tenderness, sometimes not so public, sometimes it's very private, sometimes not enough. But there are many moments where a man is able to show that tenderness. And even the ruggedness of a footballer, you know, the toughness of a bikie, so to call, that stereotypical male. I'm sure that in the private of their relationships, in the private with their daughters and sons and with their girlfriends and their boyfriends and the whole thing, that they're also showing a tenderness that is not the stereotypical version of the character that we in society think they are. Everybody is capable of the same level of tenderness. If given the opportunity, more people would be expressing that tenderness. The reality is, the question then becomes, not is man capable of being tender, not are women able to be sacred and precious, but are we producing a society that freely allows that, or is constantly crushing it? That's the real question, not whether we are or whether we are not, but whether society is allowing this or not.